After the break, a pop quiz. What does the U.S. have in common with China, Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia? Not nuclear capability or oil production. It is a top 5 ranking for capital punishment. We will discuss America's death penalty problem coming up next. It's been 8 years since a prisoner was executed in the state of Arkansas. But if the Attorney General in the state has his way, that could change very soon. This past Thursday, the Arkansas Supreme Court dissolved stays of execution for 6 inmates on death row, clearing the way for a potential revival of the death penalty in the state. But before Arkansas considers its return to capital punishment, state lawmakers might want to look at what's happening in the rest of the country, where states are reconsidering the penalty given new evidence showing gross injustice and enormous cost. 33 states still retain the death penalty, but 13 of them haven't executed anyone for at least 5 years. And in 2012, Connecticut became the 17th state to abolish the death penalty, following the lead of 5 other states in 5 years. Last year, only 9 states executed inmates, the fewest in 2 decades. There is a reason for this. These days, capital punishment is looking less and less effective and more like a system of punishment riddled with grave mistakes and mortal injustice. When the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 1976, they left it up to the states. But 3.5 decades later, evidence shows that the death penalty does not appear to have done much to deter crime, and its application has been rife with error and bias. Hundreds of people have been wrongly convicted on death row. Since 1973, 142 people have been taken off death row after being exonerated with DNA or other evidence. Racial bias has been pervasive. African Americans make up 13% of the U.S. population, but represent a disproportional 35% of those executed since 1976. A widely cited study found that in the state of Georgia, black defendants were 1.7 times more likely to receive the death penalty than white defendants, and murderers of white victims were 4.3 times more likely to be sentenced to death than those who killed blacks. If the moral argument isn't sufficient, there are the economic costs of putting a man or woman to death. An average death penalty case costs the state millions of dollars. In California alone, since 1978, the total cost of enforcing the death penalty has been over $4 billion. That's $308 million for each of the 13 executions carried out. 2 years ago, the American Law Institute, which provided the framework for the modern capital justice system, concluded that the system was a failure that could not be fixed, citing the current intractable institutional and structural obstacles to ensuring a minimally adequate system for administering capital punishment. After years of enforcing a policy that is not just cruel and unusual, but deeply flawed and hugely burdensome, perhaps a framework is in place for consensus that the death penalty should be outlawed. Before Arkansas ends its hiatus on capital punishment, it should consider the evidence, the injustice, and of course, the human toll. When the Supreme Court ruled that mandatory life sentences without parole were unconstitutional for juvenile offenders, the opinion pointed to the, quote, evolving standards of decency that mark the progress of a maturing society. Other maturing societies include 2/3 of the world's countries that have abolished the death penalty, including Canada, Mexico, Australia, and all of Europe. If standards of decency should evolve on any justice issue, it should be this one.